Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 5th episode of Season 7 of Law and Candor, the podcast wholly devoted to pursuing the legal technology revolution. I'm Rob, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill, and thanks again for tuning in. As you know, we've been celebrating Women's History this month and during this whole season, and we're excited to bring you yet another innovative guest speaker in our female cast takeover. And I think this is really just has become one of our favorite seasons. But before we do that, let's cut to today's episode of
Sightings of Radical Brilliance,
where, of course, we bring you the latest in legal and other technology. And Bill, what have we got today?
China's growing use of emotion recognition tech raises rights concerns. This is really interesting yet again. I think the first paragraph of this article that we found on Reuters sums it up. It talks about the technology that measures emotions based on biometric indicators such as facial movements, tone of voice, body movements, etc., and how that is got a lot of human rights watchers very, very concerned about the wider implications.
For sure. And, this is like where the tech, AI technology really can kind of cut both ways. Like, I know, for example, that they've done studies with police. And if you read Malcolm Gladwell's latest book, Talking with Strangers, he talks about it there too, where they'll ask judges or police officers, what's more effective, an AI-driven model that, will try to tell you that someone's lying, for example, or a human with, all this intuition over the years. And of course, humans always think they're best. They're almost invariably wrong. They have their own biases that kind of pollute that. So I get the sense, I get the idea that you could have technology that would help, but I think the article really does a good job of talking about, just function creep and all the different things that, there's so many more cameras around and, CCTV, and we don't see it as much in the US, but, if you travel, you see it in other cities. And being able to take that data and, it always starts with something innocent. We're going to use it to, verify your identity to enter a building. But what it turns into, of course, is now it becomes something that's trying to, figure out your emotions in every second of your life. It's scary.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. And by the way, I love the term function creep. I'm going to try to figure out a way to use that in everyday sentences. But it's a slippery slope, right? I mean, how long before, you start by doing something, putting these cameras in and having AI measure someone's, emotional response to different things in the workforce to try to make the workforce more efficient, or putting it in schools. But how long before we're using this to recreate, that old Tom Cruise movie, The Minority Report, where you're trying to predict crime through AI and arresting people before the crimes take place? And, obviously you don't want crime to take place, but at some point, does that become a human rights issue? Are you punishing people before things occur? Are you punishing people based on what you think they might be thinking or what they're about to do and not what they've done? It's a very slippery slope. The impact of technology on everyday life it cuts both ways.
And I think, Bill, we don't always agree on everything, but we can totally agree that the only valid use of this technology is like in Blade Runner, where it's used to separate humans from replicants. I think that makes sense, but all this other stuff.
Obviously, I think Harrison Ford would be in favor in that one circumstance. I agree. Listen, anyway, really interesting article by Reuters. I think you can find this topic being discussed generally. This came out on January 27th by Avi Asher Shapiro. China growing use of emotion recognition tech raises rights concerns. Check out the article. It's very, very interesting and certainly current as to what's going on in the world today. Let's get to our guest speaker. I have to say, Moira Errick of Bausch Health, one of our favorite guests that we've had on. She was hysterically funny, really brilliant. Talked a little bit with her about AI and analytics. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. This was a really fun one for us. We enjoyed Moira. Check it out. Moira Errick, Bausch Health, on AI and analytics. Take a listen. All right, now for the portion of the program that we've been waiting for, our guest, our very special guest, Moira Errick from Bausch Health. And she's going to speak to us today. We're going to talk about AI and analytics for corporations, and we're going to get some common use cases. Moira, how are you? Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So before we get started, we've been doing this now for the last couple of seasons. I don't think there's any two stories alike when it comes to how you got into this space, how any of us got into this space, right? Nobody went to college, nobody went to grad school, nobody went to law school and said, I want to be in eDiscovery. And I think that's especially true for those of us that have been in the field for a while before it was a big thing. And Rob and I have been in for 15, 20 years respectively. And I'm not quite sure when you got in, you could tell us, but I think 15, 20 years ago, this was an all boys club, right? And so it's interesting whenever we talk to women in positions of power in this industry, it's really interesting to hear the story. How did you get to this position? And just give us a little background on how you came to us today as an expert in the field, as a guest on Law and Candor. How'd you get here?
By trying to leave legal.
Well said.
I did what every law firm loves. I went to go work for a client because who doesn't love that? And I was going to work for the client because decided I was done with law. I wasn't going to get my law degree. Every person at the firm had been like, no, you don't want to do it. Don't do it. There's a lot of attorneys. Go find your own niche. So I went to go work for a client in their pseudo legal department doing consumer data analysis, and left to go there 2008. And then in 2009, we all know what happened. And within days, my boss approached me and was like, wait a minute, didn't you used to work in a law firm? Come with me. Come back to the dark side. And that sort of started the downhill spiral of going back into legal. And actually, it's been great because I have learned so much from that first portion, getting in on the ground floor. And it was a boys club. I was the only girl at the table for the entire time with the company. I'm going to say like the last year I was there, some more women got brought into the fray, which was fun, getting everybody up to speed and, suddenly having people on my side of the table, so to speak. And then making the jump from selling car parts to selling drugs opened up a whole new experience too. eDiscovery really it's a niche, but then it's a niche within the individual industries as well too. So
ironically, that's like the first season of The Wire. I'm not sure if you ever watched that.
That's right.
I have. I don't know that I really align with any of the characters in particular, but
No, that's great. Yeah. Thanks for that background, Moira. Like, we just love to hear the stories about how people got here. And I agree with you. I also escaped a law firm and ended up back in eDiscovery, but I feel like my reincarnation as an eDiscovery analytics person is a much better fit for me. And speaking of analytics, a lot of our favorite podcast topics are on AI, and we're really excited to talk to you about this today. And maybe just to set the stage a little bit, could you just give us a sense of, what types of AI and analytic tools are interesting to you or that you might be using?
So before I get started, standard disclaimer, only speaking on behalf of myself, not speaking on behalf of my current company or any other company that I've ever worked for. This is my opinion. So that being said, I'm going to let my nerd show and admit that I love big data. I love crunching. I love taking these huge, gory, ugly sets of, terabytes upon terabytes and letting computers just chew them up into pretty little pictures and reports. Love ECA, love being able to not just get a report telling me who's talking with who if I'm sucking in 100 gigs of emails, but also seeing like those cloud charts and those word charts that show me that, Joe Smith sent 152 emails in one day to Bob Smith. I know I'm going to have to look a little harder. So love things like that. Love getting threading reports. I know, so nerdy. Love seeing huge, overwhelming topics turned into discrete little nuggets of information that I can feed to the attorneys to help them understand this is a better avenue. This is a better direction. Let's eliminate this entire custodian because all of their email is spam save for one, and it has nothing to do with this topic.
You're definitely talking to the right group. Let your nerd out because, again, we love this too. One
of the things that has come up recently, and I think you've had some experience with this, I'd like to to pick your brain on a little bit. Everyone's heard of OCR. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of us that have been big fans of Ray Kurzweil, I'm a big fan of Ray. And I think he's the one who invented OCRing way back in the day. And it was for blind people to be able to read. That's how it was originally. That was the original reason for OCR to be invented. But I think you've had experience with something that, frankly, I have no experience with. And that is ICR.
Yes.
Can you dig into that a little bit? Because if we're going to let your geek flag out, let's let it fly. Because I've never heard of this. I don't think Rob's ever heard of this. And this is, you had mentioned this when we were leading up to the podcast, and I think this is super interesting. If you can get into this a little bit, because I would love to geek out with you on it.
Okay. So I brought my notes for this to make sure I get the numbers right. Okay. So ICR is intelligent character recognition, and it actually exists in two forms. One where you're utilizing the neural network of a computer in order to actually, through human feedback, teach it to read handwriting. And then there's also ICR that you can apply into a QC environment over top of OCR. So when you're doing that form of ICR, what you're actually doing is you're, again, using the computer to push through the QC process, not just to the document that you're looking at, but you're also having the computer look for similar hiccups, shall we say, and apply that same correction so that you go from a QC of, let's say, 10,000 documents, you carry that one change. Let's say it got the as TEH instead of THE. It'll carry that through to every single one of your documents, reducing your hands-on time and your eye-on time significantly. Now, that's great for speed and that's great for shortening QC. But the concept of being able to teach a computer through minimal hands-on work, how to recognize handwriting, even the messiest doctor's handwriting, even, the sloppiest kindergartners just learning to write, absolutely fabulous. It is a painstaking process to kick it off because it does require a lot of, turning and staring at the computer and being like, is it an H? Is it a G? Is it a Y? But once you really get that churning, it just eats through it. It's fabulous. I haven't had the opportunity to have to deploy it in a way that I would need to defend it in court. Kind of don't know if the technology is there and the appetite to dive that deep into computer neural network is there yet. But paper's not going away anytime soon. So, start brushing up on your cryptogram reading because it's coming.
You know what I always find funny about this is, whenever technology solves a problem for us or makes things a little bit better or streamlines something or, there is, and I understand it. I get that we have to figure out a way to defend it. I understand that, but we never go back and defend these antiquated processes that we found over long periods of time have all of these holes that technology has to solve for. And it's the same thing we deal with tar. For years, tar was one of these things that, we have to get a court to stand behind it. We have to defend it. Well, who went back and defended search terms on each individual case and went back and said, all right, here's what we got, but we have no idea what we missed because they were guess and check search terms, and we never went back and looked at what we didn't get by the search terms. That is a huge hole in the process. Yet we don't feel the need to defend that because it's much more linear and it's much more manual as opposed to relying on technology that requires this extra level of defense. And I understand it to an extent, but I think sometimes courts put this sort of burden on attorneys and technologists, almost too much so, right? Because what you end up having is you're slow to roll out these issues that technology can help you solve for because the defensibility of it is still sort of being worked out, and it's so subjective as to whether or not it's defensible. Whereas, again, if you're saying, well, we don't want to use tar, we don't want to use ICR, we're just going to use OCR. Well, how do we know if it's right? We're looking at words that the search terms aren't landing on them because they weren't captured correctly, right? That's the issue that exists now, and so you want to check on ICR and see if there's if it's defensible. In the meantime, the old way is not working, but you're totally fine with that and that not being defensible. Sorry, you hit a pain point. You're going to geek out. You're going to hit these pain points on me. This is one.
Well, I'm going to flip the pain point on you, though.
Please do.
is it really the justice system? Is it really the judges and the courts that are stopping us from doing it? Or is it our own level of self-doubt? Is it our own fear that we can't defend it? Is it our own fear that we have to defend it? Is it our own lack of understanding that's preventing us from pushing forward confidently and saying, here it is, use it, it works?
I absolutely agree with you. I think that, Rob and I've had this discussion many times, and I think it's right. I think people have been, it's almost like as if people have been scared stagnant, right? It's just kind of like, I don't know, like maybe they read about an opinion a long time ago, someone couldn't defend a technology, but that's not where we are now with a lot of this stuff. If the cure can't be held to a higher standard than the issue in which the cure was set to solve for, right? So anyway, again, I agree with you. I don't think it's necessarily, I'm not blaming any individual judge out there, but I just think that we've gotten to the point where we've stifled or certainly slowed down introduction of technology to solve problems because of this overwhelming need to constantly defend it.
And not just that, like even when you make it over that hump, the next one is you have a technology, it could be helpful. There's interest in applying it, but when that case starts, everyone just kind of reverts back to the mean, and there's not time to test it now because we're on the timeline and we've got to get these documents reviewed, we got to get that production done. It's really frustrating. It's like I think both of those things just make innovation really tough. And Moira, like speaking of innovation, like if you look at the future or you look at some of the challenges that you or people are facing now, what additional use cases are you most optimistic about as far as using, AI and analytics for?
I think there's a place in every case for AI and analytics. It just depends what you want to deploy. And I think that's something that as an organization, you need to come to an agreement about what the standards are, whether it's the volume of data that you're looking through, or if it's, the type of case that you're facing. There is a time and a place for all of these things. Like, is TAR appropriate to use when you have a employment issue that involves just 2 employees? Probably not, but maybe some ECA to determine, should there be 3 employees? If you have a giant MDL that involves 100 custodians, then yeah, you really should have a standard for ingesting and using TAR to churn through all that data. And also there should be standards as far as the type of data that you're looking at too. Structured, unstructured, scanning, there's your OCR opportunity every single time. And you need to find those opportunities and leverage them as best as possible so you can start to squeeze the new technology in and say, hey, we're doing OCR, let's supplement with ICR. Get everybody used to what the standard technology is so that you're not scaring them with the new technology when it comes up.
So important. I think, the more we standardize these solutions, the more they become part of the regular course of business, and that we have these standard workflows in place, the more adoption we'll get. But that leads to the question, I think, we're always dancing around this. How do you get other people on board? How do you get team members on board? Because we see this all the time where there's always somebody willing to I'm not even going to say experiment. There's always someone willing to leverage technology to help them solve problems to end up keeping their own company's costs down, or if you're with an outside counsel, to keep their clients' costs down. There's always somebody there like that. We love working with people like that. I'm sure you love working with people like that. But not everybody's always on the same page. And so what ends up happening is you have somebody, I used to say all the time that technologists and lawyers and IT people, they don't all sit at the same lunch table, right? If you go into the high school cafeteria, the technologists are sitting together, the lawyers are sitting together, the IT people are sitting together. They're not all mingling at the same lunch table, but they have a common problem that they need to solve a lot of the time. So how do you get some of the other people on board, especially lawyers, that sometimes are slow to adopt technology? And I see lawyers that still go do their research in books rather than using LexisNexis or Westlaw, right? I still see lawyers that are only using search terms because they don't trust TAR. I see lawyers that they want to have the physical document in their hand printed out, right? So how do you get people to realize, is it just the almighty dollar, and do you do an ROI on what the technology can do for them? How do you get them on board? Is it a case-by-case thing, or do you have like a process that you've seen that's been successful to get people on board with your forward way of thinking about how to handle these problems?
So to piggyback on your cafeteria analogy, serve it up as dessert. Make it sweet, make it tasty. Let everybody want to take a bite.
Well, bravo, by the way. Bravo. Well done.
Nice.
I'm thinking brownies. I'm hungry. I haven't eaten yet. So, really, this is an opportunity, especially if you have vendors. Leverage your vendors. Have your vendors run these metrics for you. Prove your point. If you can, using TAR, even just starting in smaller cases, if you can lop 30,000 documents off and you know what your per document review rate is, there's your cash cow. There's your dessert. If you can prove using ECA, right? So ECA costs you X amount of dollars up front, but it saves you 4 custodians. That's a huge cost saving with a cherry on top. Use your vendors. Like, seriously, people, use them for everything they've got. They have the ability to spit out so much extra information that I think a lot of us don't know about, don't have the time for, or don't want to look at, but you're paying for it anyways. So pull it in, justify the costs, and make your vendors work for it too. Have them help you.
Yeah, those are excellent points. I really appreciate that. Hey, Moira, before we let you go, one thing that we're trying to do in celebration of Women's History Month is ask our guest speakers to give advice to other women that are in the eDiscovery industry on, a challenge that you've had or a way that, you've been able to move your career forward and what you could share with others out there.
So I think one of the most important things that women need to do in this industry and in all industries is have a mentor. Find another woman in the industry, especially in eDiscovery. There's so many powerful, vocal, and really influential women in the industry. The eDiscovery revolution was started by a woman, Judge Shira Schindland. And, now you also have Judge Lisa Laporte, Lisa Margaret Smith, Farrah Pepper, Jamie Brown, name dropping guys, Ellen Blanchard, Constance Moctitis. There's so many great women out there who want to share their knowledge, who want to share their time, who want to share their experience and help you find your own path. Every woman's path is going to be different, but every woman is here to help you on your path.
Love that. We should quote that and throw it on the banner for this season of Law and Candor. That's exactly what we were looking for. Moira, thank you so much for doing this. First of all, I'm going to try to capture some of your genius and some bullet points. If I screw them up, it's only because I'm just not on your level, but let me try. So we started to talk about analytics. We started to talk about some analytics here. We dove into a little bit on ICR, which is something interesting because Rob and I admittedly did have no experience with it. So love when we learn stuff on this program. So intelligent character recognition goes a little bit beyond OCR, whether that's, in leveraging it, leveraging the computer, the neural network and the computer to teach it to read actual human handwriting, or the ability to for the computer to correct sort of en masse, right? So that if they find an error somewhere and they look for that error, if the error is something consistent in the scanning process, that it's corrected en masse and not as one-off, so that you get that consistency in it. It reduces hands and eyes on documents. Love that technology. I think it's really cool. I'm actually going to look into that a little bit more. Then we started to get into, when do you roll this stuff out? What do you need to have in place? You talked about standard workflows for types of cases, whether to use your example, if it's a 2 custodian employment matter, maybe use some ECA to see if we should have had 3 custodians involved. If it's a giant MDL, have a standard in place. The more you have that standard in place, that template for rolling out the workflow, the more defensible it will be. Let's touch on defensibility. Don't let defensibility stifle the progress of technology to solve problems. I love the other thing you said, use your vendors, find out what they're capable of and exhaust their capabilities. I think most vendors will run some POCs with some of their technology. So if you're not sure and you don't want to bet the farm on a bet the farm litigation with that technology, well, let's do it in a POC. I love the whole concept of using vendors, because I think Rob mentioned too, a lot of times, everybody's all gung-ho to use some technology and then they look back and they go, well, we don't really have time now, let's do it next time. And it never ends up getting used. So I love that. In terms of the celebration of International Women's Day, which this whole season of the podcast is dedicated to. I love that last point you made. And if I could just sum it up into 3 words, it's find a mentor. I think that's great. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to use this. And the next time I'm talking to a client, we're going to talk about leveraging technology and talk about AI and when to use it and how to use it. Serve it up as dessert. That is, if there's a title to this podcast, it's going to be AI, serve it up as dessert. Loved it.
Love it.
Brilliant. You were a fabulous guest. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Moira. You're awesome.
Glad to have been here.
Yeah, that was great. Really great. Talk soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for listening. And I know the election's over, but your vote can still count. Vote and enjoy Law and Candor. Rate us, leave a review, talk to your friends about Law and Candor. Whatever you do, we appreciate you listening and spreading the word out there. Take care.